What does the grandfathering really protect? 异国寻梦想，投资要设防。欢迎来到美财帮，我是主持人 Andrew。今天我们继续有关 EB-5 投资移民的话题，而且今天呢，继上一期我们请来了 AIOC 的副总裁兼投资者关系部的主管基洛先生这一期我们又迎来了两位大咖。因为我们这个节目的主要受众是这个 Chinese investor 所以呢，我先用中文普通话对两位重磅嘉宾做一个简要的介绍。待会儿我们请他们用英文补充自我介绍。关于基洛先生的这个介绍，如果大家错过了上一期节目的，请出门左转收看上一期有关那个落水救生项目这个节目，好吧？
上次就介绍过
了。好，那我们先从这个普通话的这个嘉宾介绍开始。首先我们介绍的这位是 Gary Merson Gary 先生。Gary 先生呢是过去20年一直就职于美国国土安全部，并从2013年1月开始担任移民服务监察办公室总管，主导 EB-5 领域的利益相关方合作与政策制定，且牵头与美国移民局，也就是 USCIS 及美国国务院的跨部门工作小组，推动签证排期与签证公告截止日期的协调工作。此外，Gary 先生在众议院司法委员会移民分委担任首席律师，积极参与了推动 EB-5 改革的跨党派合作，并为改革与诚信法案成功通过做出了重要贡献。所以毫不夸张地说， Gary 先生是历史上进入投资移民区域中心工作的政府资历最深、政策影响力最大的不是之一，是唯一前美国移民局官员。我们欢迎 Gary 先生今天参与我们的节目。虽然他听不懂没关系。接下来我们介绍 Chris 先生他的这个全名是 Christopher Mason我们简称 Chris 呢是前移民局重量级人物移民局首席经济学家的 Chief Economist， 而且他是526和924申请的审核部主管。那我简单介绍一下，即使在老郑时期，其实526是个人申请，924是区域中心申请。他也是历史上第一位加盟区域中心的前 EB-5 移民审核团队主管就我们再次 distinguish 一下我们刚才说 Gary 是最重量级官员，是我们说这个 Chris 是第一位加盟区域中心的 EB-5 移民审核团队主管是强调一下。那么在2010至2020这10年间Chris 一直服务于美国移民局，并先后承担重要管理职责，为 EB-5 的这个526以及区域中心924申请的审核政策的落实、程序和机制的优化都做出了巨大的贡献。在此期间，他领导的审批团队批复了上万例EB-5 申请，对行业产生了积极而深远的影响。而且呢，在此期间呢 ，Chris 还积极的统筹参与跨机构协作与政策制定，为 EB-5 行业的有序发展搭建坚实的框架。他还主导内部培训计划，助力项目诚信建设，甚至深度参与了法规的更新以及国会听证，用专业能力为行业发展保驾护航。这些独特的工作经历让他对 EB-5 行业的政策逻辑、审批流程和项目运作形成了精准且深刻的理解所以基罗，我们今天请来的这两位大咖，一位是前首席律师，一位是前首席经济学家，
没错，
到齐了，
真的是
好，
非常重量级。
那我们就
开始
We go switch
Okay.
into something you can understand.
Yes, sounds great.
Okay, today we are going to talk about two major topics. like grandfathering and the backlog.
Yes.
However, before we reach out the grandfathering, I think let's take 2 steps back. The first step is the 2021 lapse. The second step is the definition of the 3 very, very academic terms. Then we are going to invite you to give us an explanation.
Sounds great, yeah.
These 3 terms are, the first one will be hard sunset.
Okay.
The second one will be legal limbo. The third one will be grandfathering. Who's going to kick off?
I'm happy to start.
Please.
CCA.
Thank you.
Andy, it's really a pleasure to be with you here and the team at MY Securities. Gino, thank you also for inviting us today.
I forgot something. So before we start with these 3 definitions, please do some self-introduction in
Yes.
English.
Okay.
And please tell our audience what is your new role in ALC.
Okay.
Sorry about that, I just forgot it.
So we'll hit it.
Okay. CCA, Andy, it's
Once again.
really a pleasure to be with you here today. Gino, thank you also for inviting us. I know that for American Lending Center, John Shen is our founder and CEO. MY Securities is a very important partner. And so we value you and really thrilled to work with you. My name is Gary Merson. I serve as Executive Vice President for ALC. I've previously was with the US government for 20 years. I worked in the Department of Homeland Security. That's the department over which, of which USCIS is a part. And USCIS is, of course, the agency under which the EB-5 program falls. I also had the opportunity to work in Congress and in the White House in the prior administration. And I started with ALC last August. I took my first trip to China in November, and I'll be back in April of this year.
Please.
And so similar to Gary, I recently joined ALC roughly 6 months ago. I'm currently the Chief Communications Officer with the American Lending Center. Just like Gary, and we've known each other for 15 years or so now. I've also spent most of my career with the US federal government. I was part of the team that actually launched the EB-5 program in Washington, DC. Ultimately, I became the chief economist of the program. So I had a really great experience there and was able to see the program, top to bottom from really the early days to pretty close to where it is today. The past few years I've spent in the private sector, in the banking world, so with one of the largest banks here in the United States, and then the past few years in the due diligence world looking at investment. Thrilled to be part of the ALC team. It's really an exciting time in EB-5. And ALC, I think, is the best on the market. We're growing, we're taking the approach that you would see some of the biggest and finest financial institutions in the world. We're taking that same approach to EB-5.
Thank you very much. So shall we start from the hard side?
Let's jump into it.
Yeah.
So we wanted to talk about the lapse in 2021. And we're 5 years later, but I know this is really still at the top of people's minds. The EB-5 program is not a permanent program. It needs congressional reauthorization, and there are many programs within the US government that function in this way. And the benefit of it is it requires Congress to come back and reassess the program and make sure it's working as intended before being reauthorized. So the EB-5 program has a sunset date, a hard sunset date of September 30th, 2027. And Congress will need to take action before then or at that time to reauthorize the program so it will continue in place after that date.
But what is the difference in between the hard sunset and legal limbo and grandfathering? What are the differences?
So I think the biggest sort of natural progression from thinking about the sunset date, which is sort of the end of the program if it's not renewed, is the grandfathering date. And that was really important because it was put in place to protect investors who file on or before September 30th of 2026. So if you are filed within that time frame, you're protected whether or not the program sunsets beyond that. So it's very important if you're considering your investment today to make sure that you're tracking your progress along that timeline, because those protections were really important as they launched the new legislation.
So we have a 1-year difference between the grandfathering, the expiration of the grandfathering provision, and the program sunset, the time at which Congress will need to take action to ensure the program remains in place. But I'd note a couple things. One is that the 2022 law is the first time we ever had a grandfathering provision. Prior to that, we did not have this. And it provides investors protection, but the protection is only valuable if we have a program lapse or expiration. And that maybe takes us back to the question of what happened in 2021.
Because I heard from Gino that back to then, everything is kind of like, fully stopped. It's like chaos.
Yeah, for 9 months. Yeah, well, I think we've been talking about grandfathering clause recently because we want to push the investors who submit the petition before September 30th, 2026. That way they can get protected.
That's right. Yeah.
I really want to discuss in a little bit more detail, who is going to be, what kind of investor is going to be protected? So is it as long as they have the 526E receipt, or they have to put all funds at risk, or both? For example, USCIS accept the partial funding petition. Let's say there's an investor submit the petition by August the 30th this year with $200,000, but the rest of the funds will be arriving after September 30th. Is he or she still going to be protected?
The operative date is the filing of the petition. The filing of the I-526E petition. So as long as that's filed before September 30th, 2026, investors have the protection afforded by the grandfathering provision, and no matter what happens with the program, they'll continue. But I believe that the program will be reauthorized.
Right.
There might be some twists and turns before we get there, but I do believe the program will be reauthorized, in which case the grandfathering provision will be less important. Now, I would say, Anthony, that an EB-5 investment is an enormous decision. It means moving your family to a new country, a new language, and I would not let the grandfathering date drive that decision for you because it's too big of a decision.
Oh, right. For sure.
But once you've made that decision that you want to move forward with EB-5, I would move forward expeditiously. I would move with all due dispatch. You still need to make sure you have the right regional center, assess the track record, do the due diligence, make sure you have the right attorney you're working with, make sure you have the right broker-dealer you're working with.
Thank you.
But don't delay, because a short delay now could actually result in a lengthy delay later.
But back to the 2021 lapse, would you agree that after the grandfathering has been granted, that will never happen again, and we just transformed from an agency discretion into a legal mandate?
So let me take a step back and try to answer that, and I'll let Chris also weigh in here. The program is not permanent, and so many times before it's needed to be reauthorized. Now, prior to 2022, there were problems in the program. There was fraud, there were bad actors, and the 2022 reform law has instituted a host of requirements for regional centers. And these can be burdensome, these can be costly for regional centers, but they're worth it because it's really helped address many of the problems that were in the program before. And I worked on the reform law when I worked in Congress several years before it was enacted. I was in Congress in 2015, 2016, and then it took us until 2022 to get the law enacted. Now, traditionally, the EB-5 program gets reauthorized on the appropriations calendar. The US appropriations year ends September 30th and then begins October 1. But often, as oddly as this might sound, the US Congress does not complete its work by September 30th.
Washington efficiency. That's right. That's a typical term in the United States.
So the EB-5 program and many other programs in Congress are often extended for a short period of time. We call it a continuing resolution is the term. And then often around the holidays in December or sometimes into the new year, they will complete the appropriations work. Because there was a big debate about the 2022 reform law, and some were not ready to support that change, there was an effort to decouple the EB-5 program from the regular appropriation schedule. And that's what allowed the program to lapse. And that's what pushed us ultimately, as difficult, as stressful, as concerning as the lapse was, that paved the way for the program to get the reform that it needed to now be on more solid footing than ever.
But just to sort of recap, right, the safest position at the moment is filing on or before the grandfathering date. That really locks you in and affords you those protections within the law. So that's the strongest position. Then you've got another year before sunset. The program still exists. And Gary lives on Capitol Hill. He knows this stuff inside and out. When we think about the possibility of reauthorization and you think about the Washington, D.C. inefficiency that you mentioned, right, it kind of seems crazy to think that we might be able to get some sort of a new piece of legislation passed. But real quick, let me break down how easy it actually could be. 2 pages of text referring to the current legislation and explaining that all we need to do is change the date is all that's needed. And then we could have the program reauthorized for 5, even 10 years. So it's really actually a simple process that could lead to reauthorization. So that sort of feeds into that, plus the fact that we have legislative support on both sides of the political aisle. We think that we will get that reauthorization. But again, I'll circle back. I'll highlight it. On or before the grandfathering date is the safest possible position that you can put your application in.
Okay, first is the first. I mean, what does the grandfathering really protect? I mean, for example, is a guarantee of approval, or is to guarantee we are in place or in line? What is the grandfathering really protect?
That's a good question, Andy. It really is. What grandfathering means is if you file before September 30th, 2026, your petition will move forward to adjudication, to a decision from the agency, no matter what happens with the program. Now, if the program, or when the program is reauthorized, as Chris and I both believe it will be, then actually grandfathering is not important because the program will continue, and that's what essentially grandfathering is assuring. It's assuring you that your petition moves forward no matter what happens with the program reauthorization.
Yeah, so like you said, if this program is lapsed or did not continue, so what if the program, the rules changed after the September 2027? Let's say if the investor, subscribed and submitted a 526E petition with 800K, but after September 30th this year, and then what if the law changed or the investment amount raised like to 1.5? Is it going to affect the investor that submitted a petition during this,
Yeah, I think the simple answer is no. The requirements that are in place when you file and the eligibility requirements that you need to follow, that carries through with your application. And so once new changes go into effect, typically within the way that the US government legislates, it's on or after that date that the new changes will take effect. Even today we can see a little bit of different requirements for the pre-RIA and post-RIA investors. Similarly, if they make changes, it would be for the investors filing then and onward. So again, circles back to what it looks like today. You know that there's the grandfathering protections. If you want to take advantage, you've got this window.
Right. So shall we see the grandfathering really protects is the expectation. It's not an approval.
That's right. It's participation. Yes, you're guaranteed to be able to participate. The flip side of that, the double-edged sword, whatever you want to call it, is the fact that you need to make sure that your application meets the requirements. Because if you go through the process beyond that date, and let's say you have an RFE, a NOID, a denial, you're in a tough spot. You have to make sure that you have your application in order before the date.
And let me add to that. So the EB-5 process can be lengthy. Investors have to make sure they have a legitimate source of funds, for example. And I'm sure this is something you work with your clients on, Andy. And this could take several weeks or even several months, depending upon how complicated,
at least 2 months.
how complicated your finances are. So looking ahead 7 months to the September 30th, 2026 deadline, investors really need to start working now with their broker-dealers, retaining a lawyer, an immigration lawyer, and identifying the regional center and project that you want to work with. We're going to see things in the EB-5 space become a bit frenzied, I think, as we head towards the grandfathering date. And it's going to be more important than ever that you're cautious, thoughtful, and thorough with how you prepare your petition.
Yeah, well, I think this piece of information is very valuable for a lot of investors or potential investors, because I kept receiving these questions. It's like, so I definitely want to submit my 526E petition before the date, September 30th, but my source of fund is not ready. So what if I pass this September 30th? I'm going to be affected by the future risk, where I'm not going to be protected by grandfathering law. So right now, what Gary and Chris said was like, we're pretty confident that the program will be, or we're kind of confident that program will be continued. Mm-hmm. And so as long as this program is not lapsed or ended, you're fine. You're totally fine.
But Jill, because you are also leading the investor relationship department,
right?
I'm pretty sure that you get this question very frequently.
Yeah.
Because I do as well. Many investors, they keep asking, is it enough to lock the priority date, or let's say prioritized date, by only using a I-526E receipt? Do you think that's good enough or not?
That should be good enough.
What do you think?
I think one thing to point out is you can't just file a blank application, right? You can't just go with the skeletal filing because the agency will deny those, right? And we've seen those in the past. We have seen people trying to lock in. So really, it's that judgment call of, do you have enough evidence to support the case? Are you at a certain place? Yeah. And that goes back to, you got to start now because it takes time, right?
Here is a question, because this, I mean, in the real world, we are keep finding this kind of situation. Some of our investors or customers, they are going to look the prioritized date by using installment payment method. Okay. Yeah. For example, they pay like $200,000 in like a deposit, and they got a receipt. Do you think that's already safely locked their application, or do you think they still have some risk?
I think $200,000 should be a pretty good substantial amount, right?
So I think I'll start and let Chris come in. I think there are two things, right? One is the protection for grandfathering, and that should be locked in upon the filing of the petition, of the I-526E petition. The other question separately is installment investments, and that is permissible under the law, but you want to make sure you have a clear articulation in your filing documents of the milestones for investment. And you don't want to miss those either. So if you're going to start with $200,000 on March 1 and April 1, you need to invest $200,000 more. You need to make that investment by that deadline.
But let me put like this way, okay? Because by law, the law says, okay, you have to show the commitment to invest. Whatever, how good is your SOF, the source of fund, that doesn't mean you are actively investing into EB-5.
Correct.
So my concern is, even if, suppose today, if I were a EB-5 investor, if I put 200,000 or 100,000 already, do I still have any risk that the USCIS will reject my application? Because how can I prove that I'm willing to invest?
Really, it's the commitment of capital, as you mentioned, right? And so if you can show that you're in the process of investing and you have a plan that you're committed to that obligates you to make the payments that will eventually make up the 800,000, that's permissible. Will the agency ask questions? It's possible. They may want to say, we've seen that you've got this payment plan, a year has now passed or 6 months have passed, show us what's happening. So you can't just put 200 in and then sort of disappear. You have to actually make sure that you're continuing to follow the path that you've laid out. That's really the key.
When I was reading this kind of documents, that's something really funny. I got a little bit confused.
Sure.
By law, it says that you have to make the full investment before the officer review your case. But how do I get this information? How do I know when is the time they are going to review my case? I don't have this visibility.
So, for better or worse, we're seeing the agency slow down a bit in its processing.
This is a reckon.
So, and we do know that the rural petitions for rural investment projects move a little bit quicker. But you should think when you work with your broker-dealer or work with your immigration lawyer, you should think about the timeline for the installment investments and how that might relate to USCIS processing. If you're pushing the installment out a year or two, that creates significant risks.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was gonna talk about. Like, so in USCIS, in ALC, all of our clients, when we talk to the clients, the potential clients will always, if they want to do partial funding, we always suggest that the second installment would not be more than 3 to 6 months following the first installment. Make it the safest.
I think that's on trend with what we're seeing with the adjudication timelines. Yeah.
And I would also add, I think that's consistent with the way ALC tries to operate as a regional center, which is with a conservative approach. We do that with job creation, right? We make sure we always have a cushion for job creation, contemplating that a project will have, in fact, more jobs than will be needed for the number of investors. We always want to do things in a way that will ensure investors have the best chance to complete the immigration process. And we call that immigrant first investing.
Yep.
Right. So, shall we say, generally speaking, if we can make the full investment within the 6 months, that we should be safe?
I think that's a reasonable approach. Okay. I do think so.
And plus the rural projects, USCIS always, adjudicate those 5 to 6E petitions pretty fast, especially with the 956F approval.
That's right.
So if you, put the second part of the funding after 6 months, then you might, the USCIS might gonna, send you an RFE asking where the money is.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then I think what would be prudent at that point, if at all possible, would be to complete your investment, but before you have to respond to the request for additional evidence from the agency.
Do you have any advice to our potential investors? Because some of them, they believe their eligibility will be locked, will be confirmed when they file in the application. But
there's just a natural delay. Once you file, right, it just depends on the government agency's efficiency to get through what they've got already in queue. And so there is a lag time between actually filing and when it hits somebody's desk. And as Gary had mentioned before, we're seeing those timelines slow down a little bit. So in the context of installment payments, it works out well. It gives you potentially an extra cushion. But again, you have to have that plan up front. You can't wait too long. You need to make sure that you have a structured plan. And that's what we work with our investors to make sure that it makes sense.
Right. Thank you very much. That's sustainment.
That's sustainment.
That's not at risk.
At risk has to be there, yes or no? Sustainment at least 2 years.